So, today on the podcast, we continue our story of Disney legend Mary Blair. When we left off last time, Mary, though living in New York, was back in California for many weeks at a time to work on the Children of the World attraction for the New York World's Fair. Walt would later call this attraction It's a Small World, but as we start out our episode today, we aren't quite up to the point where that name change has happened. Mary is still working through problems with her husband, Lee, problems that stem partially from his frustration as an artist. But in California, on her own, Mary was able to devote her artistic vision fully to the attraction that she was designing for Disney, and that, more or less, is where we pick up our story today. In 1964, Mary faced a number of problems at home. She could see that her older son Donovan, a budding artist, was struggling a bit at school, and that her younger son Kevin was faring far better, but his interests were centered in computer technology and engineering, which were two fields in which she had little experience. She was supportive of the interest of both her sons, but at times she worked to find points of connection, particularly with Kevin and his fascination with space exploration. Her larger struggles, though, were centered on issues that spiked up around Lee. Lee remained jealous of her opportunities in Los Angeles. It wasn't her professional success so much, though that was part of it. Rather the opportunities to work on highly visible projects with Walt. Walt viewed Mary's talents as central to developing the Children of the World attraction, a job that placed Mary in a prestigious role, while Lee himself sold clients on his company's services, oversaw scheduling, and supervised production, both in live action and animation, for various commercials, corporate documentaries, and TV segments. At times, Lee worked on his own art, but with his career responsibilities, he had little time to devote to this. Mary was aware that Lee had affairs, short encounters that presumably happened while she was away. She was also troubled as to how much time Lee spent outside of the house, away from her, away from the boys. In contrast to the personal challenges she faced in New York, the Disney assignment in California allowed her space to create art that depicted innocence and joy, two central qualities that at times were missing from her life back home. She was more relaxed in California, more herself. At Disney, she occupied a top spot in the organization. In New York, she was one of many excellent illustrators that worked in publishing and advertising. The professional and social support she found in California led to some of her most iconic work that was possible in part because she was able to lower her guard, forget the issues at home, and let her inner vision flow freely onto paper and onto stages that were being constructed around her. My personal feeling is that with this attraction, she blossomed, Rolly Crump explained. She'd done some great stuff, but if you look at all of Mary Blair's work, there was never that explosion. It was a combination. It was about the children, the freedom of color, and that Walt asked her to do it. Creating an attraction for the World's Fair was both similar to and different from her assignments as a concept artist for feature animation. As a concept artist many years earlier, she had developed paintings that guided the visual style and color palette for multiple Disney films. But when she finished her concept pieces, she was moved on to a new project, and others took on supervisory roles to shepherd the film through production, projects led by her art but not managed personally by her. While working for WED, though, Mary wasn't just tasked with concept design. She would supervise the project through development, fabrication, staging, and even installation in New York. Though Walt, of course, would have final approval of the attraction, Mary largely oversaw development of the show stages, which were the visual centerpiece of the ride. As work moved beyond paper designs into physical development, she found herself coordinating work of other artists and engineers employed by Disney. One key individual was Blaine Gibson, who sculpted models for the Mary Blair figures. In the past, Mary had seen artists struggle to transform her flat designs into the dimensional space of film. Now she worked with Blaine to ensure the finished figures would radiate the same childlike wonder as her drawings and paintings. It was sort of difficult for me to try and develop the three-dimensional character designs, Blaine Gibson explained, to fit her two-dimensional style, but ultimately I think we were able to get the feeling of it. His plans were to produce one central Mary Blair figure that, with different skin tones, eye color, hair arrangement, arm configurations, and costuming, could then be reused more or less throughout the ride. This was one central challenge that he faced: how to create a base figure that could be repurposed a couple hundred times inside the attraction. Another concern had to do with the placement of joint areas for movement. Mary's drawings expressed characters arranged in static poses, similar to drawings she had made for books. In this, she hadn't thought deeply as to how the sculpted and then molded figures would be segmented for expressive or rhythmic movement. In planning his sculpts, Gibson envisioned figures that could house basic motors and were segmented at the neck, shoulders, and hips for different movement patterns. Can-can dancers who kicked up a leg, musicians who moved their horns, and British guards shifting their ceremonial spears. He also considered how dimensional figures would radiate the essence of Mary's drawings. For guests moving through on boats, they would find one moment where, from just the right angle, figures on a stage achieved their perfect presentation. But as the boat course was serpentine, guests would see these same figures from many angles. These figures would need to look good for guests who could see them from roughly a 180-degree perspective. In developing his sculpts, Gibson made 3 prototypes for the standard head, then asked Walt to pick the best one based on cuteness, expressiveness, and a sense of childhood innocence. The finished dolls, according to Harriet Burns, would be little more than a jelly bean body and little arms and legs. Because of their bouncy, rhythmic movement, the dolls would soon be known around WED as the Rubberheads. The next steps in developing the figures were mass fabrication and costuming. The figures could be arranged with different skin tones to represent children from around the world. This process was managed largely by technicians at WED, but costuming and figure finishing was overseen by artists mostly housed in the model shop. Again, Mary Blair worked in a supervisory role to help unify the visual presentation of the figures. For the costumes, Mary and Alice Davis selected traditional designs to define each region. Indian boys wore turbans, Dutch children wooden clogs, and so on. Though much of the costuming was handmade by Alice, the Disney team, including Mary, acquired authentic elements to complete design. For example, they visited Olivera Street in Los Angeles for sombreros and shops in Little Tokyo for plastic fish and paper balloons. In terms of materials, they used traditional silk for the production of Indian saris and wool for the bagpipers' kilts. Mary and Alice both were conscious of the underlying message arranged through design. Beneath their costumes and skin pigmentations, the figures were mostly the same. In this, the attraction suggested that real children, beneath their external pigmentation and adornments, held similar hopes and longings, largely for peace, joy, and a sense of connection with those around them. The attraction wasn't only a musical celebration of world culture, it offered a political message about the deep connectedness of humanity around the world. Once dressed and finished, the Rubberhead dolls were wired up for a relatively new sound-based movement process that Disney termed audio animatronics. A Disney team of engineers programmed the cyclical movements of the figures along with music for the show on a single 1-inch magnetic tape with 32 separate channels. Some channels delivered music to various speakers arranged into show stages, while other channels delivered impulse sounds that drove air cylinders to manipulate the doll's movement on stage. But the rubberhead dolls weren't the only characters developed for the attraction. There were 2 types of figures in the ride, Rolly Crump explained. The realistic-looking figures, which Blaine Gibson sculpted, and the toy-like figures, such as the little wooden soldiers, which Jack Fergus and I were building. Some of these toy figures were sculpted out of blocks of styrofoam, and others were created with a process similar to papier-mâché. Crump wanted his toy figures to stylistically match the doll figures designed by Mary and sculpted by Blaine Gibson. Jack and I knew that Mary had illustrated a series of golden books for children, Crump continued, so we went out and bought a bunch of those books to analyze her style. We wanted to build the toys as if they had been designed by her, and we wanted to remain faithful to her style. Together they observed the elements in the Blair books and tried to replicate the style in their toys. Inspiration for individual toys came from many sources, from actual toys, from photos, from drawings, even from Walt himself. Walt had just returned from a trip to Europe, Rolly Crump explained, when he walked in the office and handed me a box. "A happy birthday, Rolly," he said. Rolly looked at the box confused. He then explained to Walt that it wasn't my birthday. Walt indicated he should open the box. Inside was a delicate toy figure riding a bicycle across a length of wire. Walt wanted Rolly and Jack Fergus to make a larger toy figure of this acrobat to be featured in the ride, with the wire passing directly over the boats. In this now, the attraction had multiple points of interest for guests: the Mary Blair doll figures, the oversized toys, a musical score that featured national anthems from around the world, and theatrical spots to bathe the stages in colored light. Inside Disney, the attraction was focused on visual whimsy, a presentation of colorful and rhythmic stages, and its message of peace, largely free of socio-political concerns. But outside Disney, this attraction was quickly becoming a political bulwark for the World's Fair Corporation against concerns related to the civil rights movement. In 1963, New York City was a center of civil unrest. Throughout the year, the NAACP and other groups held marches in Harlem to protest segregated housing, police brutality, and job discrimination, primarily against African Americans. Similar protests were held in Brooklyn and Manhattan, which also included issues specifically related to local jobs, such as the limited number of meaningful roles for black actors on Broadway, and fair pay for African American and Puerto Rican workers in hospitals. Even the World's Fair Corporation itself had been criticized for a lack of diversity in its staff. 2 years earlier, the Urban League of Greater New York charged that Robert Moses, president of the World's Fair Corporation, and his team had not hired enough African American workers, particularly as supervisors and managers. Dr. Edward Lewis, representing the league, claimed that the fair's aim of world peace through understanding would ring hollow unless changes were made. This critique, when picked up by the New York Times, did prompt a slightly higher degree of racial diversity on the World's Fair staff, but nowhere near the level of diversity in the surrounding boroughs of New York. The Disney ride at this point would serve as an aspirational dream, a reminder of how all people are connected and share basic goals, which was something the Fair Corporation could point to when explaining how the message of equality was embraced in the presentations at the fair. This message, coded into the visual grammar of the ride, was largely the work of Mary. On the one hand, this ride represented a vision of idealized peace and community among children, a dream the real world might never reach. And on the other hand, this ride, even though fused with whimsy, subtly expanded the message of the civil rights movement that beneath skin color, hair, and clothes, all children yearn for the same things: friendship, community, love, and respect. As summer began to cool toward fall, the WED design team stationed in California struggled to finish the attraction because Disney facilities were already overwhelmed with other shows for the fair, such as the Ford Magic Skyway and the Carousel of Progress. The stages for this attraction were developed in rented space at Grosh Studios. Grosh, located in East Hollywood, primarily built sets and backdrops for film production, though they also took on related jobs such as design work for elaborate nightclubs and occasional stage construction for dark rides. In short, they had rental space along with equipment that studios could hire when necessary. The show stages arranged there would bring together Mary's child figures as well as Rolly's toy figures, combined now with backdrops, props, and theatrical lighting. To finish the sets, Rolly Crump and Jack Fergus bought 195 pounds of glitter, over 8,000 costume jewels, 370 yards of braiding, and 336 tassels. They went through 5 pounds of glue a week as they finalized the sets at Grosh. Placing the stages at Grosh offered the team more space, but the arrangement came with limitations, as it was difficult to access areas at Grosh as well as their equipment on weekends. One member of the model shop, Joyce Carlson, recalled that deadlines now caused the design group anxiety. In the European scene, Rolly designed the chess people. Mary asked me to put jewels on the king and queen. Mark Davis said not to put them on. I was caught in the middle. Apparently, they had a loud discussion about it. Mary came to me and apologized for me being put in the middle. Then she said to put the jewels on. I listened to Mary and didn't hear anything else. Though WED was, in ways, a free-flowing arts and engineering collective, Mary's opinion now was the one that defined the presentation. In this, Rolly Crump understood how important Mary was to the project. She had designed the iconic Rubberhead dolls, though Rolly and Jack Fergus had designed the toy figures. They had stylized their work on watercolors previously created by Mary. Crump was also aware of Walt's deep affection for Blair's work. Because of this, Rolly thought that the ride in some way should include a tribute to Blair as its designer, its artistic parent. The idea of a tribute inside of a ride to an artist, a person other than Walt, was new, as most amusements and films produced by Disney pointed back to the company's leader. Still, Rolly felt this was important, as this wasn't only a Disney ride, it was an expression of Mary's artistic vision. Without doubt at this point, time spent on a quiet tribute was an extravagance. The team was pushed up against deadlines, but Rolly saw to it that one of the dolls, later to be placed in the ride, resembled Mary. We were living off black coffee in the morning, Crump explained, and martinis for lunch. Mary and I were kind of kidding that if it hadn't been for gin, we never would have opened Small World on time. Despite the workload, he found time to create a doll that resembled Mary. Jack Fergus and I decided to build a Mary Blair doll, he explained. We dressed her in a Mexican poncho, black tights, and black boots, not much different from the clothes Mary usually wore. I did a caricature of her face and made her hair from yellow chicken feathers. This figure would be eventually placed in the ride, allowing an icon of Mary to live in the world she had imagined. This figure would be eventually placed in the ride, allowing an icon of Mary to live in the world she had imagined and developed for years. The tremendous amount of work Mary and the team lavished on the attraction was lost on no one, not even Walt. Everyone was kind of tired, Alice Davis explained, and Mary thought it would be fun to go to Vegas. Walt loaned us the company plane to fly to Vegas. On this trip were Mary, Hazel George, and Mark and Alice Davis, all looking for a little relaxation, likely while sections of Grosh were closed over the weekend. They left the studio on Friday night with the plane scheduled to pick them up on Sunday. Walt gave Mary a silver dollar to bet for him, Davis continued. Mary carried it with her, a bit of luck from her boss. She put it in a slot machine and then, with a whirl and spinning wheels, the thing sounded its bells and spit out its prize, 17 coins, which Mary put in her purse. Once home, out of a sense of gratitude, she created drawings of figures in the ride they were creating, a ballet dancer, a can-can girl, and so on, and glued one of the silver coins next to each of the happy figures. It was a unique card weighed down with money. At the studio, when she found Walt, she offered him the drawings and the coins, an artistic bit of gratitude for the use of his plane. He carefully opened the Children of the World card to find the silver coins there. But as Alice explained, Walt didn't take the money. He removed the coins, he kept the drawings, but insisted Mary take the money. As the stages were finished, one by one they were transported from Grosh over to WED. Typically, attraction stages would have been mocked up at the studio, but because of the ride's late development schedule, the studio had already booked all of its sound stages for a very expensive film, Mary Poppins. As such, the Children of the World attraction was mocked up at the WED facilities in Glendale, a mock-up that then revealed a central problem in the ride's design. The original plan featured mechanical children in each showroom singing their own national anthem, a collection of 24 musical numbers presented from stage to stage. God Save the Queen, then the March of the Volunteers, then O Canada. Once the sound was turned on, it became apparent that this soundtrack wouldn't work. The Serpentine ride course, even with baffles to dampen sound, didn't effectively isolate the various anthems. Technicians knew that the sound bleed would be even worse once the stages and the equipment were installed in the prefab metal building Disney was building in New York, a thin metal structure casually called the barn. After hearing it, Walt understood the musical elements needed to be reworked, as the sonic space couldn't be configured so that guests would clearly hear each anthem. For this, he looked to studio songwriters Dick and Bob Sherman, better known as the Sherman Brothers. Beyond the designs created by Mary and her team, the brothers would bring the final iconic element to this ride. By this point, the Sherman Brothers had already worked on dozens of Disney projects, from the Tiki Room to Poppins, from TV episodes to another World's Fair attraction, the General Electric Carousel of Progress. One afternoon, Walt took the brothers down to the WED facilities so they could see the mock-up and its problems for themselves. He walked them into a large room and gestured toward the raised stage areas around which were positioned temporary walls. There were hundreds of ethnocentric audio-animatronic puppets set up on both sides of a serpentine corridor, Bob Sherman recalled. As we walked slowly through the snake-like walkway, numerous recordings of vocals were emitted from each section of the ride. The sections were divvied up by country, with each group of audio-animatronic children singing its own national anthem. The current mock-up didn't include the entire ride, maybe about half, but it was enough to demonstrate the sound bleed, patriotic tunes that produced musical chaos. "So we heard," Dick said, "a soundtrack of children's voices. It was national anthems of the various countries, and all of a sudden, you couldn't understand a thing. It was horrible. Bob looked down the length of one stage, tiny dolls raising their arms and kicking up their feet. You couldn't tell what they were singing, he explained. It was a cacophony. Walt, standing beside them, only nodded his head. That's my problem, he advised. He then explained that he was hoping the brothers might write a song that could be sung in rounds, with lyrics translated into different languages. To be specific, he needed a song in which the melody remained the same from stage to stage, even if the language shifted. Beyond this, he needed a song that could be orchestrated into many international styles, from Celtic folk to Latin samba, from European waltz to symphonic pop. And we need it fast, Walt said. Come up with something that talks about world understanding, but don't make it preachy. He began to walk towards the exit and with a turn of his wrist indicated the brothers should follow. We're opening this thing in 6 months, he said. Though Walt didn't mention this specifically, the brothers understood the song would need to satisfy two audiences, adults and children. The adult would enjoy the music on one level, while the kid will hear it on quite another level, they explained. They worked on this material in their office at the studio on the top floor of the animation building. They didn't work on just one song. They worked on multiples to give Walt options. But only one of their proposed songs was coming together. We wrote the song so fast we thought it was too simple to play for Walt. Then we worked 2 weeks trying to find something better. But before they could draft out other possibilities, Walt called them up. Where's my song? He asked. The brothers took their song, arranged on a lead sheet and pieces of other possible songs, over to Walt's office. His office was very close to theirs, only a couple of hallways over. The one song they liked was called It's a Small World After All. It had a simple verse and chorus, somewhat like a folk song, that could be repeated from stage to stage with the notes arranged in different keys to reflect the musical style of a host country. Walt's office had multiple rooms, a reception area, a private office, and also a formal office that included a piano. Dick sat at the piano while his brother stood at his side. Dick played the melody and sang while his brother joined in for the chorus. As the music filled the room, Walt half closed his eyes, as was his habit, as presumably he thought about emotions or ideas the chords and melody inspired. Then his lips lifted ever so slightly at their corners. Yeah, that sounds like it, he said. Walt, though he enjoyed the song, didn't immediately accept it. As was his habit, he wanted input from creative leads. He explained that the three of them would go down to WED and play it for the team there. In Glendale, Dick again sat at a piano while Bob stood beside him. Dick played the music and sang the lyrics, with his brother joining in at the chorus. The audience was small, only a few people, but almost surely Mary was in the room, listening to a song that had been written for the ride she had designed, a ride whose stages she was still finishing. There's no record of her reaction, but the Shermans recalled the team at WED liked it. The original tempo for the song as Dick played it was relaxed, gesturing more toward a ballad than a march, but by the time the Shermans recorded the first demo, the song was decidedly upbeat. The demo featured Dick Sherman and ex-Musketeer Jenny Taylor on vocals. The demo was bouncy, bright, two voices accompanied by piano and some light brushwork on a snare. From there, Disney brought in jazz pianist Bobby Hammock to orchestrate it. Previously, Hammock had worked on internationally themed albums, such as Latin tunes for Henry Mancini and South Pacific melodies for his own quartet. Under his direction, the song was voiced in such a way as to radiate international traditions. The Japanese section was arranged with pentatonic scales and voiced for a stringed koto. The Scottish section was arranged for bagpipes. the Mexican section a mariachi band, and so on. Hammock also developed an overture based on the melody, incorporating musical styles from around the world. This overture would be played in the courtyard as guests approached the ride, much like an instrumental number at the start of a Broadway show. Most importantly, though, these versions of the song would solve the problem of sound bleed. The music in each room would be at the same tempo, arranged into 48-second cycles, with the music from one segment of the ride pairing perfectly with the music arranged for the next segment. The final ride would need 29 different versions of the theme song. Some tracks were recorded overseas by children. TV performers who spoke Spanish recorded one segment in Mexico City. A school chorus recorded another in Rome, and a group simply comprised of children recorded yet another in Tokyo. With this, the song's title also became the name for the ride. In press materials beginning in August 1963, the ride was referred to as It's a Small World. It's a Small World was not only a perfect song for the ride, it could easily be an anthem for the commercial art of Mary Blair, a soundtrack for the images she carried in her mind, children expressing hope and a sense of community. Beyond the ride, this song could be a musical theme for her Little Golden books or her advertisements for Meadow Gold Dairy. It might also be a musical motif played in galleries as visitors admired paintings of children she had made in Mexico and South America. More than that, it was a soundtrack for her artistic soul, or at least part of it. Images of serenity that her mind developed day after day, even while Lee slept around and while her sons, now teenagers, explored life beyond family. It was a song that represented an imaginary place she wouldn't mind inhabiting, much like the icon doll that Rolly would eventually place in the attraction. In the real world, though, It's a Small World was an ideal soundtrack for this ride she had helped create. Beyond all this, the song did one more essential thing. It offered a path to finish this attraction, with the figures soon voicing new lyrics so that everything could be soon crated up and shipped to New York. Mary, with her neatly clipped blonde hair and stylish black sweaters, urged her team forward so this ride could do what it was designed to do: entertain children and remind visitors to the fair that it was possible to imagine a better world, arranged through art and music, with stages full of hopeful children that guests would see. As they floated in boats through the quickly made show building, enjoying one of the most memorable experiences Disney would ever create. A different outro for today. As you probably know, my new book, Making Mary Poppins, will be out on November 11th from Norton. There's already some publicity. The News and Culture magazine Airmail carried an excerpt from the book in the issue that was released over this past weekend. But here I wanted to start highlighting some personal appearance dates in the next month or so. And there will be more beyond these. But as these venues all have web links up already for the events, I'm announcing them first. On November 23rd, I'll be in Tampa at the Oxford Exchange. On December 1st, I'll be in Los Angeles at Book Soup. On December 7th, I'll be in Miami at the Coral Gables location for Books and Books. And on December 18th, I'll be at the Burbank Public Library in Burbank, California. So if you happen to live near any of these cities and want to come out and say hi, I would love to see you there. Most of the events are free. There's a small $6 venue charge for the Tampa event, but also most of these events ask you to reserve a seat online to make sure everyone has a space. Again, I'll have more dates to add in the weeks ahead, but as the venues have posted these already, I'm announcing them here as well. You can find links to buy the book in the show notes today, and you can also find links to the 4 events I mentioned as well. Lastly, as you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just 2 things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions, specifically by listeners who join us over on Bandcamp as monthly subscribers. On Bandcamp, you will find over 300 episodes not available on iTunes or anywhere else. But the best reason to join us there is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can support us by becoming a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in our show notes. So, until next Sunday, this is Todd James Pierce.